Ever since 2020, Apple events have been the most anticipated events in the tech community. Not just because of the products which they announced, but also about how they announced it. They use groundbreaking cinematography and animations which make watching an Apple event not just feel like any other tech event, but more like a one-of-a-kind experience. Unlike what Google and Facebook usually do.
That's too bad. I don't know what happened.
Every single thing is crafted in such a way that it really makes it feel special, including the invite or logo or whatever it is they call it. But have you ever wondered why every Apple event invite is some sort of remix of the Apple logo? I mean, like, why don't they just put the original Apple logo on it instead of spending thousands or even millions of dollars on custom artwork for each event? That's why I'm here today, to talk about the meaning of every single Apple event invite logo. Some have very obvious and clear meanings, while others are very deep and you'd have to take some time to really understand them. Starting with the first ever 100% Apple event keynote, which was WWDC 2020, and the invite looked like this. It wasn't a modified version of the Apple logo, but with just a little bit of context, you'll see that it's actually very obvious. Unless you were born tomorrow, you should know that 2020 was a very difficult year, especially in the United States with the Black Lives Matter movement and the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, before 2020, Apple event keynotes would be live in front of an audience at Apple Park. But this was not going to be possible because people were forced to stay home in order to reduce the spread of the virus. So instead of risking people's lives, Apple decided to make the keynote online instead of completely canceling it. And that's where this invite comes into the picture. It showed three people looking at their laptops, which is a clear reference to the event being online for the first time. The keynote started with this cool animation showing people all around the world using their computers. And as it turns out, everybody on Earth uses a MacBook, so I'm probably on Mars or something. The next Apple event invite is, to me, one of the most interesting of all. They called it Time Flies, and this was the first Apple event invite which was a modified version of the Apple logo, at least the ones which were held online. And it would set the standard for how nearly all online Apple event invites would look like from here on out. The name of the event already hinted what would be announced. I mean, time flies, time, watch, Apple Watch, you get it. Then Flies was a reference to the new iPad Air, which was also announced. Now, about the logo itself, I personally think it was a reference to a path being drawn by the Apple Pencil, which is used on iPad. As you can see that the Air in iPad Air is also illustrated in a similar way. And I think this was also the first Apple event in which they told you ways by which you would die if you don't buy an Apple Watch, such as a heart attack, diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiac arrest, or even blindness. So please buy an Apple Watch so that you won't die. Now, the next Apple event is actually quite nostalgic to me because it was the first Apple event keynote I ever watched. And if you already watched the event, this one would be very obvious to you. It was the first online iPhone announcement, and it is, at least at the time of recording this video, still the most viewed Apple event on Apple's YouTube channel. The invitation featured some circles around the Apple logo, which was a reference to MagSafe, which are magnets behind the iPhone, which lets you easily align a wireless charger and other accessories to the phone. Oh, and before I forget, this was also the first iPhone which didn't have a charger in the box. They said it was for the environment. Yes, it was for making Apple green. With all the money they made selling chargers that year. Make it rain, baby! 2020 was quite a busy year for Apple because they had like 4 events in 3 months. This next one was on November 10 and it was called One More Thing. And it was, to me, by far the most interesting online Apple event, just behind WWDC 2024, which a lot of people now hate, but we will talk more about that later. One of the things I really loved about this one was how they started by showing people who use Macs in their daily lives, such as Kendrick Lamar, Billie Eilish, and it was also funny how they included Lisa from The Simpsons using her knockoff MacBook, which has 2 bytes in the Apple logo. I guess 2 bytes are better than 1, huh? Anyways, enough of that. That's not why you're here. So the invitation looked like this. The colorful rays of light were a reference to the transition of Macs from Intel chips to Apple Silicon. Yeah, that was the year when Apple broke up with Intel. Yeah, this color theme was shown out throughout the event, and one of my favorites was when they made the MacBook Pro look like Superman here.
How cool is that?
The next one was called Spring Loaded, simply because it was held in spring. The invitation looked like this, a rainbow pipe, if you can call it that. And all the colors on the pipe represented all the different colors of the new iMac, which were announced that day. The pipe, which I called it, also represents something you would draw with an Apple Pencil on iPad, which was also announced that day. And the intro for this event was by far one of my favorites. I mean, just look at how beautifully this pipe moves through Apple Park only to form their iconic hello. And if you think this is cool, wait till you see my favorite. Oh, and if you've been enjoying the video so far, please leave a like and also subscribe to the channel if you would love to see more videos like this one. Oh, and while I was editing, I realized that all of the iMac wallpapers were just pieces of the hello, but not directly. You sort of had to tilt them and stuff in order to really see it. And yes, I know that there is still one left. I couldn't find a place to fit it in. I'm not Tim Cook, okay? And there's a link in the description if for some reason you would like to use this monstrosity as your wallpaper. Now, this next event to me, I think, is the most fun Apple has ever had while creating an event keynote. And I'm going to show you why in a minute. It's WWDC 2021 and its invite looked like this. It was a Memoji head looking at an open MacBook screen. We have to understand that this was 2021 and the world was still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. So this invitation was trying to communicate that this one would still be online. The reason why I said this event was very fun was simply because of the intro. I mean, Apple just literally went to a couple of developers and asked them to come up with an opening. And no matter what they said, regardless of how crazy it was, they actually did it. This guy even asked,
"Are you actually able to do all this?"
Of course they can. They have like $1 quadrillion. Next on our list is California streaming. There really isn't much to talk about this invitation. It was just the Apple logo placed in a beautiful landscape, which I assume is somewhere in California. The event, however, featured a lot of product updates such as iPad, iPad mini, iPad Watch, Apple Watch, and iPhone. And personally, this was one of the most boring iPhone releases ever. It would have looked exactly like the iPhone 12 if they didn't play with the cameras a little. Have you ever been to a 3-hour-long meeting and felt like it could have been an email? Well, that's exactly what the first 10 minutes of this event felt like. The invitation looked like this and was simply a reference to the new M1 Pro chip which was announced, you know, to show off how fast it is. And they spent the first 8 minutes talking about how they've added a new subscription tier to Apple Music and new colors for HomePod. No new features at all, just new colors. I'm still wondering why they didn't just tweet that. Apple Silicon was really a great leap for Apple because yet again this next event is still Apple Silicon themed. As you can see on the invitation, they literally called it peak performance, and the clones on the Apple logo were sort of like a reference to the different chips which each device got, like the A15 Bionic on iPhone SE, M1 on iPad Air, and most importantly M1 Ultra on Mac Studio. And the different colors which each of the clones or copies of the Apple logo had were a reference to how rich and vibrant the new studio display was. You know, the display with a stand which cost $1,000 and does not come with the display. Yes, that one. Next up is WWDC 2022 and the invitation looked like this. It's not very obvious at first look, but after watching the first few minutes of the keynote, you will instantly realize that it was about inclusivity and diversity. People of any color or gender can participate in the conference, as shown by the colored memojis. They talked about updates to their operating systems as usual, but what really stood out for me was the new MacBook Air, which they announced. I mean, the Air branding was initially about how thin the laptop was, but now look at this. I mean, it's not thick, But when you place it next to a MacBook Pro, the difference really sort of disappears. The September event that year was quite interesting, mainly because they started the keynote by showing you the many different ways by which you could die if you don't buy an Apple Watch. Like being crushed by a garbage compressor, freezing to death from a heart attack, or being a bear's dinner, and much more. Anyways, here's what the invitation looked like. The artwork looked like this, mainly because of the new satellite SOS feature which they added to iPhone, which lets you contact emergency services if you're in trouble in an area which doesn't have cell service. Oh my god, this just came to me. They were also indirectly telling you how you would die in the wilderness if you don't buy an iPhone. Well played, Tim. I honestly couldn't tell if WWDC 2023 was good or bad, so I'll let you decide. Unless you were living in a cage back then, I'm sure you knew that tech companies were simply crazy about AI back then. Every single tech company you could think of were trying to catch up with ChatGPT. So when people saw this invitation for WWDC, most of them jumped into the conclusion that it must have had something to do with AI because it kind of had the Siri colors, right? Very wrong! Instead of releasing some sort of revolutionary AI solution which would shock the world, they went with something that no one was expecting. Vision Pro, which were just very expensive AR/VR glasses with features that we've been seeing for years on products from Meta and Microsoft. But it's Apple. Everyone will talk about them like it's something that we've never seen before. Now, what does this have to do with the design of the invitation? I watched the entire keynote but still got no clues. You guys will have to help me out on this one in the comments, but I think the way the Apple logo looks like on the keynote thumbnail on YouTube kind of suggests how light reflects on Vision Pro. I don't know, help me guys. Okay, now at this point Apple needs to chill because I think this was like the third time they started a keynote by showing ways by which you or your baby will die if you don't buy an Apple Watch or iPhone. Anyways, here's what the invitation looked like. The Apple logo on the artwork meant to represent small pieces of titanium, which was the material they used in making the iPhone 15 Pro. It's very funny how they made such a big deal about it throughout that section of the presentation, only to diss it 2 years later on iPhone 17 and switch back to aluminium. More on that later. This next event was the shortest one ever. It was just 30 minutes long and it was the first which they shot entirely on iPhone. And they just kept on shooting their keynotes on iPhone from there on in. The event was very Halloween themed and it was called Scary Fast. The invitation looked like this mainly because of the new black MacBook Pro which was announced. And the Scary Fast name was just a reference to how fast the new computers were going to be. There was one thing that really stood out for me while I was watching this event, and it had nothing to do with anything which was announced. Okay, pause right here. Look at this. I mean, is she typing with her nails? How do women do this? Someone please let me know in the comments. Oh my god, this next event was my favorite Apple event keynote, mainly because of this sweet animation in its opening. Like, oh my god, look at how crazy it looks. Nobody does online keynotes like Apple. They make it look so easy, but trust me bro, this is hard to do, man. Even down to the invitation. This was also my favorite artwork from a creative standpoint. It was also the most obvious. Everybody knew that it was going to be about iPad. They literally had a hand holding an Apple Pencil on it. Come on. They also announced what they called at the time the thinnest Apple product ever, meaning that they must have been selling very thick credit cards. Okay, I know I've said this before, but this next Apple keynote, WWDC 2024, was probably the most fun Apple has ever had while shooting one of these keynotes. I mean, it started with them skydiving. Look at Craig's helmet. I think Tim had to take the bus because he's probably too old for stuff like that.
Wow, that was so cool.
Anyways, here's what the invitation looked like. And just by looking at it, everybody and their grandma knew it was going to be focused on AI because they had the Siri colors and Apple had not mentioned anything about AI. And it was 2024, they had to. Otherwise, their stock price was going to suffer. They spent about 40 minutes of the event talking about all these new and groundbreaking AI features which would come on all of their platforms. But fast forward almost a year later and they still haven't released anything meaningful. Fast forward to September. Here's what the invitation looked like. They called it It's Glow Time. Everybody knew just by looking at it that the event was going to be Apple Intelligence themed. And also we're going to finally release their highly anticipated AI features with iOS 18, right? Wrong, and it still wasn't ready. And the few features which they actually ended up releasing were so bad that they had to pull some of them back. Like the notification summaries, which were giving people misleading information from news apps and other sources. It just didn't feel like Apple at all. They were even sued for false advertising because of all of their billboards and promotional material for iPhone 16, which were all talking about Apple Intelligence. It was a disaster. WWDC 2025 to me was the most interesting of all, mainly because of the new UI which they announced. Here's what the invitation looked like. Nobody could really tell what it meant before watching the event. It was a reference to their new UI design which they called Liquid Glass. And it was the first time Apple tried changing their UI design since iOS 7. They also changed their naming scheme for all of their operating systems to have the number of the year which they would be used the most. In this case, it was 2026. This next event had a very bizarre name. They called it Awe Dropping, which I think was like a mashup of awe-inspiring and jaw-dropping, but still a very bizarre name. Here's what the invitation looked like, and just by looking at it, a lot of people guessed that they were going to talk about thermals. Anyways, they were referencing the new vapor chamber in iPhone 17 Pro, which was designed to better regulate heat when the iPhone is being pushed to the limit. They also switched back to aluminum because it's better at conducting heat than titanium. The entire phone was redesigned this year for better thermal conductivity. Thanks for watching.